Take away the bedroom door. Then take away the bedroom. Take away the hallway as well. What remains is a house whose interior may be one undivided room. Somewhere to cook, work, store possessions, eat, rest, and sleep. Now put one of the most private events in human life inside that space: childbirth. We have to be careful immediately because the evidence does not preserve a neat scene of a woman giving birth in a one-room English cottage in 1350. What it does give us are two separate pieces of the puzzle. Archaeologists have excavated rural medieval houses with no clear internal subdivision, and evidence from medieval Europe, followed by later English evidence, places childbirth largely in the hands of women and often inside the home. Put those facts beside each other, and the question becomes unavoidable. When a household had no private bedroom to retreat into, what could privacy actually mean? The first surprise is that the phrase, "the medieval one-room house," is already too simple. At Hangleton in Sussex, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a medieval rural settlement containing several different forms of house. Buildings 3 and 8 show no evidence of internal subdivision. They give us genuine examples of houses whose interiors appear to have operated without permanent room divisions. Other houses at the same settlement were different. Some had 2 or 3 cells. At Wharram Percy in Yorkshire, excavated houses also included layouts with distinct internal rooms. So a house without internal walls was real. It was never the only rural medieval arrangement. That distinction matters because otherwise a question about one type of household turns into a claim about an entire society. The evidence will not support that. We do not know what proportion of rural households in 14th century England lived in completely undivided houses. What we can do is take the houses that were undivided seriously and ask what daily life inside one of them may have required. The next clue comes from something much less dramatic than childbirth: furniture. A modern room usually arrives with a fixed identity. A bedroom contains a bed. A dining room contains a table. The architecture and furniture tell us what the room is for. Medieval domestic evidence can be much less fixed. Household inventories from the period contain trestles and mattresses, objects that could be moved rather than permanent fixtures built into a dedicated room. Their presence has led researchers to suggest that some domestic interiors could be rearranged as activities changed. The same floor area might therefore serve different purposes at different times. That does not mean we can reconstruct a nightly routine in which every family folded one object away and rolled another one out in exactly the same sequence. The inventories do not give us that level of detail. They do show that the physical setting was potentially more flexible than a modern plan of named rooms suggests. Even the word chamber can mislead a modern reader. A chamber was not automatically a bedroom. Documentary evidence shows that such spaces could also hold crops or contain an oven. Room names did not always map neatly onto modern expectations. That changes the privacy question. If space could change function through the day, then a boundary did not always need to be a permanent wall. Time and the arrangement of objects could change what part of domestic life was happening in the same physical area. Sleeping makes that problem more visible. Bed sharing is well attested in medieval and early modern evidence. Children, servants, and visitors could share sleeping places with other people. What the evidence does not give us is a universal sleeping chart. There is no basis for saying that every poor medieval family routinely put parents, children, and everyone else into one bed. Sharing happened. Its exact form varied. That matters because popular images often move directly from bed sharing existed to the whole family slept together every night. The second claim is much stronger than the first. There is another familiar solution that needs the same caution: the curtained bed. Beds with elaborate hangings, testers, curtains, and canopies do appear in documentary sources. Their existence is not in doubt. Their appearance in the evidence does not justify putting one into every modest rural cottage. The relevant household lists contain these more elaborate bed fittings much less often than simpler bedding and sleeping equipment. So curtains may sometimes have created a visual enclosure around a bed. What we cannot do is turn that possibility into the standard privacy technology of the rural poor. The simpler lesson is more useful anyway. Beds, mattresses, chests, trestles, and other movable possessions helped shape how a room was used. The interior did not need to remain frozen in one arrangement from morning until night. There is also a problem hidden in the word family. When modern viewers hear that a whole family occupied one room, they may picture two parents and several children. Medieval household structure cannot safely be reduced to that model. Households were social and economic units whose composition could vary. At Hangleton, researchers have even proposed that buildings 3 and 8 may have been associated with an extended family functioning as a broader household unit. That interpretation is not established fact. It remains one possible reading of the site. Its value is that it warns us against doing demographic arithmetic that the archaeology cannot support. We cannot look at an undivided house and simply assign a standard modern family to it. The people using a space could change. Their relationships could change. The number present at one moment might not tell us the structure of the household as a whole, and the house itself did not end at the interior wall. At Wharram Percy, houses occupied plots with tofts and crofts and could stand alongside barns and other outbuildings. Domestic and productive life extended across a larger property. That has encouraged historians and archaeologists to think about rural space in terms of degrees of openness and closure, rather than only a sharp division between public and private. Some places were more accessible. Others were more restricted. Access could change according to activity and circumstance. This does not allow us to invent scenes in which a married couple routinely walked into a barn for privacy, or in which a child was sent to a particular outbuilding whenever adults wanted to be alone. The evidence does not tell us that. It does tell us something important about the geometry of the problem. A household living in an undivided room did not conduct every part of its working life inside that room. The wider plot provided more spaces than an interior floor plan alone suggests. Animals make this even clearer, because they sit at the center of one of the most persistent images of medieval domestic life. People and livestock could occupy the same building. That sentence is true. The image it often produces, a cow sleeping beside a child in one open room, is much less secure. At Wharram Percy, one form of longhouse included a living area, another room that may have been used for dairy work or sleeping, and a cow byre. These functions could exist under one roofline while still being separated by a cross passage. People and animals under one roof did not necessarily mean people and animals in one undivided room. Even identifying an animal space from archaeological remains can be uncertain. At Hangleton, a part of one building was originally interpreted as a byre. A later reassessment challenged that reading. The proposed animal area appeared too small and lacked the drainage expected of such a space, raising the possibility that it was instead a chamber in a 3-cell dwelling. That does not prove that the original interpretation was impossible. It shows how much caution is needed before turning a foundation trench into a scene of everyday life. By this point, the original question has changed. At first, it sounded geographical. Where did people go for privacy? But the evidence does not keep pointing toward one hidden place. It points toward houses with different layouts, interiors capable of changing use, movable furniture, variable household membership, plots extending beyond the room, and spaces whose degree of access could shift. The more useful question is therefore not where privacy was located. It is how boundaries could exist when architecture provided fewer permanent ones. Childbirth is where the limits of our evidence become impossible to ignore. Across medieval Europe from the 13th century onward, childbirth was understood and managed largely through women and female attendants. For England, evidence from the 15th and 16th centuries also shows women commonly giving birth at home with female attendants present. Those sources help us understand the social world surrounding birth. They do not give us a precise protocol for a poor rural household living in one undivided room around 1350. We do not know exactly how that room was arranged during labor. We cannot say with confidence who left, who remained, what physical screening was used, or how long any temporary boundary lasted. The correct historical answer at that point is not to invent the missing choreography. It is to recognize why the gap exists. Archaeology preserves walls, hearths, doorways, and objects. Documentary sources can list possessions. Keys, hinges, trestles, and mattresses can survive in one form or another. A rule about where someone was expected to look while another person dressed is much harder to recover. So is the etiquette surrounding a marital argument. So is the precise management of sexual privacy when other people shared the household. Their absence from the evidence does not prove that no conventions existed. It means this research set cannot reconstruct those conventions with confidence. The source problem is especially important for ordinary rural households. Probate inventories for rural non-elites become much more useful only after the period at the center of this story. Earlier evidence includes other forms of inventory, including records connected with royal administration, but the surviving material remains uneven. That unevenness should shape the language we use. Historians studying medieval domestic space have questioned whether a simple modern division between public and private is precise enough for this world. Research on rural settlement has instead used ideas such as openness, closure, access, and permeability. Work on gender and domestic space has also pushed back against rigid models in which peasant houses are automatically divided into fixed male and female zones. None of this proves that medieval people lacked a concept of privacy. It proves something narrower. Our own public versus private vocabulary may be too blunt to describe every pattern visible in the evidence. A modern bedroom gives one person a powerful physical boundary. A wall blocks sight. A door limits entry. A lock can enforce exclusion. An undivided medieval room offered fewer architectural tools of that kind. That difference had practical consequences. Eating, sleeping, working, storage, childcare, and care for illness could overlap within a much smaller number of enclosed spaces than most modern households expect. Even when activities happened at different times, separating one person physically from everyone else was harder when there was no dedicated room to enter. We cannot measure the psychological effect of that arrangement. There is no basis for claiming that people experienced constant stress because they lacked modern bedrooms. Their expectations were shaped by their own society, not ours. The physical constraint is still real. A person in an undivided room had fewer walls available for withdrawal. There is another correction worth making before leaving the medieval house. Fewer internal walls did not mean no doors, no locks, and no security. At Wharram Percy, archaeological evidence includes keys, hinges, and fittings associated with substantial doors or shutters. That is enough to reject another easy stereotype. The issue was not that medieval rural houses were simply open boxes that anyone could enter. Exterior closure and interior subdivision are different problems. A household might have the means to control access from outside, while still possessing very limited architectural separation among the people already inside. This is where the evidence supports a cautious reframe. A private room is one technology for producing privacy. It is a powerful one, and modern housing has made it so ordinary that privacy itself can seem identical to having a room. The medieval evidence suggests that this equation is too narrow. Where permanent internal divisions were limited, boundaries could be more temporary and situational. A room could change use. Furniture could shape activity. Who occupied a space could change. Areas across a household plot could offer different degrees of access. Historians may describe those arrangements as negotiated, but that word needs care. We do not possess a handbook of household etiquette telling us exactly what each person was expected to ignore, when somebody should leave, or when looking became intrusion. The material evidence shows changing spaces more clearly than it shows the unwritten rules inside them. That uncertainty is part of the answer. It prevents the medieval household from becoming either a horror story about people with no privacy or a romantic story about a lost culture of perfect discretion. The evidence supports neither extreme. Instead, it shows people living with a different architecture of daily life. Some rural houses had separate rooms, some did not. Beds could be shared without proving that whole families always shared one bed. Curtains existed without being a universal solution. People and cattle could occupy one building without sleeping together in one open space. Childbirth was strongly associated with female attendants, while the exact arrangement of a one-room rural birth remains unknown. And the categories historians use to describe access and seclusion become less simple the closer we look. Returning to a modern house after that changes the meaning of an ordinary bedroom door. Today we build privacy into architecture to an extraordinary degree. Separate bedrooms, corridors, bathrooms, and locks make withdrawal physically easier. They give boundaries a permanent shape. Yet architecture still does not answer every question. A closed door has meaning because people interpret it. A screen can be turned away. A conversation can still be overheard. A person with a private room can still have that boundary ignored. That modern observation does not prove what etiquette operated inside a 14th century cottage. It gives us a better final question. If a wall is only one way of making separation possible, then privacy has never been purely architectural. In medieval rural England, the physical evidence points toward boundaries that could be less permanent, more dependent on time, objects, access, and circumstance. Exactly how people understood those boundaries from one moment to another is one of the things the surviving record does not fully tell us. And that may be the most revealing part of the story. We can excavate the wall that was there. We can identify the wall that was missing. What we cannot excavate is the moment when another person decided that a boundary existed anyway. So how much of our own privacy really comes from the walls around us? And how much comes from what people understand those walls to mean?